Every new or beginner musical theater writer is bound to make mistakes along the way. I certainly did, and I've worked with a lot of clients who made many of these mistakes before coming to me seeking help. But I'm here to help all of you and to prevent you from a similar fate. So, here are 7 of the biggest and most common musical theater writing mistakes I see from aspiring and emerging musical theater writers. Number 1. Only kind of knowing your story. Ideas are great. We love ideas that turn into full musicals, of course. But an idea of a story is not the same thing as having and deeply knowing your story. Whether you're writing an adaptation of a well-known property, basing your story off of some sort of real-life event, or creating something entirely original, it doesn't really matter. You need to completely know your story, inside and out. When you sit down to write your story or work on your story, there should be no doubt about what happens, what details need to be included. You should know what the objectives are and how the story is flowing and toward what. Now, if you're adapting material, this doesn't necessarily mean that you need to know your source material inside and out. That could certainly be useful, absolutely. But you are writing an adaptation of that story, which means that your version of that story is going to be different, and it is your version that you need to know completely inside out, fully and intimately. Didn't mean for that to sound creepy. And don't forget, this story, this version of this story is yours, completely yours. So if you don't know it, forwards and backwards and upways and slantways, then who does? You gotta know your story. And many people seem to not. Number 2, missing your big whys. You must have an answer to why for all of the big questions about your story and your project. These whys include, why this story? Why a musical? Why are you the one to write it? Why did it capture you to begin with? Not only are these questions that a producer or a coach or a mentor or a director or a dramaturg will ask of you, but these questions also point to a whole slew of other large questions that you're going to need to know the answers to as well. Things like, what is the message of your show? Who do you want to resonate with that message? Who is your target audience? What other themes and messages are you delivering along the way? I cannot tell you how many times I've had writers come to me and they don't have answers to any of these questions. They didn't answer any of them up front. And then they wonder why everything is feeling a bit muddy and confusing. Well, this is why. Yes, pun intended. I've also created a handy little set of 6 question sets. I call them the North Star question sets that you can download for free in the description below. I would highly suggest doing that because that will point you to all of the questions you need to answer in order to make sure you have all this info set and settled up front so you don't make this mistake. Download it for free, you should. See, it's a commercial. Mistake number 3, not knowing your structure before writing. I know, I hear some of you grumbling already, but even if you are more of a pantser than a planner, please, 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 please know your structure of your story before you begin to actually write it. Now, I do want to just say here that it is entirely possible that you will go through your story, whether you planned it very well ahead of time or not, and find that your structure needs to change a little bit later on. That's totally cool. But if you don't have a structure ahead of time, then you don't know exactly where you're headed to, even if it's a very base structure. And then you will probably meander along the way, get lost, get confused, get stuck, write too much, and not know what to do. Save yourself all the heartache, my friends, and have a structure set ahead of time. Please and thank you. This has been a PSA from your local musical theater writer guy. Mistake number 4. Not deciding on the details of the world. And I don't mean what your protagonist eats for breakfast and what color the carpet is. That's not the kind of details that we're talking about. You need to know 3 major things that go into this process of knowing the details of the world. The first one should feel pretty obvious, and that's the actual setting, the time, the place, where are we, when are we, with whom are we, what does it look like, what does it feel like, what's the atmosphere like? All those sorts of things are part and parcel of the story and are baked in, and you should have that fully fleshed out for your version of what this story is going to be as a musical on stage. The second thing here is knowing the musical language of your show. What is the show going to sound like? Is it going to give any nods to the time period it's in? Will it use any particular genre of music? Will it sound more like classical musical theater, contemporary musical theater, a cross between them? Are you creating something entirely new? Will it give nods to operetta? Will you be creating musical motifs? How are you going to create the entire sound palette of the world? All of these types of things are so important to know pretty much well ahead of time, or at least to have begun to explore ahead of time, so that you can better create the sound of the world as you go through the writing process. And for all you book writers and lyricists out there, the third thing here is the language of the show. We do have the sound language that comes from the music side, but we also have the way that people speak, the way that they sing. Is there something more general about the vocabulary of the world itself? How particular is it? I think about Wicked and all the strange little words that Schwartz drops in there, and that comes in part from the book, in part from the adaptation. So what is the specific language of this place and this time and these individual people? We gotta know these things. These are the details of the world. Mistake number 5. Only vaguely knowing your characters. Unless you're looking to write a show where the characters are two-dimensional and or more of caricatures, then you're gonna want your characters to resonate with the audience. This means that they are going to need to be fully fleshed out and deep and well-rounded and three-dimensional and all those other words that mean all of that stuff. Because this is how we as audience members see ourselves within these characters. This is how we empathize. And because we are able to empathize with them, that's how we fall in love with them. And in order to know all of that stuff, you need to know your characters intimately. They have to be like they are a part of you. You have to know everything about them, the way that they are, what they think, what they feel, how they would act. That's how we create characters that are going to draw in the audience in that way that is connected through empathy. And let's not forget about things like what makes them tick, how they relate to the world around them, how they relate to other characters, their objectives, their flaws, the things that make them unique as people. All that stuff goes into creating characters that you know extremely well. Number 6, not knowing the foundations of craft. Okay, I understand wanting to write a musical and feeling like you simply want to learn by diving in and doing it. I get that because that's how I started. But it was a different world back then. We didn't have quite as many resources and quite as much access to information as we do now. I kind of had to do it that way, but that would not be what I would suggest. Now we have options to learn the craft, the depth of the craft that is musical theater writing. And we do need to know that craft because it is a tough one and a very specific one. I'm gonna break this into 2 essential components. We have the story writing side, the storytelling, and then we've got the songwriting side. Now, in terms of storytelling, yes, you can take classes on general storytelling. You can take classes on storytelling through other media, like through playwriting and or through writing for film, or how to tell a good oral story. But there are still things about storytelling that become more specific to the way that a musical is structured and how it falls out on stage as something live with music. Get your storytelling basics for musicals. Do that. Yes. And then the other piece of it is songwriting. Now, songwriting, obviously you can learn from how to become a singer-songwriter, how to write for pop, all that sort of thing. However, to write for musical theater is a completely separate animal. Not only because we have a certain set of structures that are common, yes, we can play with structure as well, but the more important thing is that the songs in musical theater have to move the show forward, either by moving the plot itself forward and or developing a character further from where they were when the song began. It is integral to the storytelling. So the songwriting piece is part of the storytelling piece. They go hand in hand. You're gonna need to know the craft basics of all of this. And if you don't, well, that is one of the major mistakes I see a lot of the time, people trying to write a musical or 2 or 3 and finally getting stuck and seeking help because they didn't understand the craft first. Get those foundations, please. Mistake number 7, having no collaboration plan. Whether or not you begin the process with any collaborators, you are going to need to have a plan for eventual collaborations that will come about. The first question would be, do you need a writing collaborator? And if so, what skills do they need to bring to the table? What parts of the writing are they fulfilling? But if you're working solo, the question becomes, what other kinds of collaborators do you need to have on board? And is it now? Is it soon? Is it further down the line? Are you going to need someone to orchestrate for you? Are you going to need a director, a dramaturg? Are you going to need to work with a group, a writing group of some variety to help give you ideas, hear what you're working with, and move forward through your writing process? And then the question becomes, when and where are you gonna get these folks? If we're talking about writing collaborators, the answer is do it now. Just go early in the process before you actually start writing. Don't wait until later in the process. I made a whole different video about it. Check it out. But the most important thing is, in addition to knowing when and where you are going to find these people, knowing exactly what kind of person you want to be working with. Because this story is going to become integral to who you are and what you do, which means you need the right people on board with you so you don't stumble and fall along the way with someone who is only kinda on board with your ideas. Find someone up front who fits a certain set of criteria or who you quote unquote vibe with, and those are gonna be the people you're looking for no matter what role they are filling as a collaborator. But I guess before you make any of those decisions, you kinda need to know what collaboration looks like. And if you're curious to hear more about that, or you are looking for a collaborator for the first time, then you should watch this video next. Otherwise, thank you all for being here with me today, and I'll see you again soon. Cheers!